of the ocean. So, yeah.
Good evening. I'm calling the Monday, August 27th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting to order. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item on the agenda tonight is the approval of tonight's agenda. Do I have any requests for changes? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second. Commissioner Kirk moved it. Commissioner Farr seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Next up, the approval of the minutes from the meeting held on Monday, August 13th, 2018. Do I have any requests for edits or
Mr. Chairman, I have an edit.
Yes. Commissioner Villarreal.
On page 3, the third paragraph, it starts 5th line down. Villarreal asked if Exhibit A, number C. I know I said number C, but I think I did correct myself to say letter C. So I would like that corrected.
The minutes will reflect your numbers and letters. All right. Any other requests for changes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve as amended.
I'll move to approve the Planning Commission minutes dated August 13, 2018 as amended.
Commissioner Villarreal made a motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Kirk. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Moving on, it looks like the first thing on tonight is the Planner's Report, Aspire 2040 update, starting with transportation. All right, Julie, will you start, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this evening for the review of the overall Aspire document, Rod Rue, City Engineer, is here to present the transportation chapter, and we have Dave Modrow and Rick Willeen here to present the water resources chapter. So as we've discussed on other evenings, where we've reviewed these individual chapters, this plan is in draft form. The city is continuing to take comment as well as refine the document based on our own staff review. In addition, in the last week and a half or so, the city has received preliminary comments back from the Metropolitan Council. This time around, with comprehensive plan updates, cities are able to submit the plans preliminarily to the Met Council and get their feedback. So we've received their comments, and we will be taking those into account and modifying the document as appropriate to address those comments as well. So what you see this evening and what comes back in front of you later this fall for public hearing may have some modifications to it based on those Met Council comments, but we'll be sure to point those out when we're back for public hearing later in September.
Great, thank you.
Okay. With that, tonight's presentations are, as Julie mentioned, on transportation and water resources. So it's a public works focus tonight. So starting with the transportation chapter, the chapter overview kind of covers a number of different areas. I'm going to talk tonight mostly about the roadway system and bicycling and walking systems, or basically the PED systems. Touch a little bit on transit and aviation, freight, and then planning for the future. So we'll get right into the kind of the transportation portion of it. And if you have any questions along the way, there's quite a few slides and quite a few graphics that we'll get into. If you have some questions along the way, just get a hold of me or raise your hand. I'll acknowledge a question. So as part of the transportation goals and strategies, what are listed here are the goals for 7 goals within the chapter, transportation chapter. First one being providing a safe and effective and efficient transportation system that meets the needs of all modes for moving people and goods and so forth around the city. Some of the strategies that we use to meet that goal include kind of prioritizing investments in the A minor arterials, which are kind of our major roadways in town. We maintain a TDM policy for businesses, travel demand management plans for businesses. And then we coordinate with regional agencies on many of their improvements, state and county projects as well. Second one is providing a safe and efficient roadway system that balances mobility, access, and diverse needs of the system. Some of the strategies we use under this goal, we try to reduce peak hour demand by some of those TDM strategies, for example, mentioned above, where try to get people to travel outside those peak hours. We control access with respect to functional classification. I'll get into a little graphic later, but or a little discussion later about functional class, but functional class goes from principal arterials down to local streets, and principal arterials like freeways have very limited access, where local streets have all access, you know. So trying to control some of the access in those intermediate ones, the arterials and collectors, so that you have access on the appropriate streets. And then we consider, as part of this, also we consider traffic control and capacity improvements. We'll also talk a little bit tonight about some of those improvements that we anticipate based on the transportation plan that we are doing. Third goal is to protect the investments in the system through preservation, maintenance, and operation. Basically, we built a robust network of streets within the city, and we want to maintain those. Keep them operating, keep them functioning properly with the least amount of cost. So part of that is we utilize different performance measures and strategies to protect those investments and prioritize investments in that system. Part of this also is maintaining trails and sidewalks within the right-of-way. The fourth goal is promoting public transit to serve all residents and special transit services for diverse populations within this community. We do that through promoting and supporting Southwest Transit. Obviously, we're part of Southwest Transit, and we work with them a lot on different some of their goals and strategies. We strengthen connections between work and activity areas. So many of the road systems obviously connect different areas, and making sure that those systems are well connected, or those activities are well connected. We support regional transit, bus rapid transit, and light rail transit. Light rail transit, obviously, we're familiar with that coming to town. Bus rapid transit is being studied. There's not a corridor in town per se that's designated as a bus rapid transit, but basically those are kind of bus-only shoulders, which we do have, but sometimes they're much more robust than that in having stations in the median, if you've seen those on Highway 77 and other places around the Metro 35W. And then land use planning is also part of that, so that land uses adjacent to transit facilities are appropriately located, I should say. The fifth goal is to provide and maintain an interconnected system of pedestrian and bike facilities for safe transportation and recreational opportunities. So that is, we promote, or some of the strategies we use in that area are trying to promote design best practices, so designing facilities that meet the needs for everyone, ADA requirements and so forth. Promote safe pathways in parking lots. As we've looked at designs and developments lately, the design of those, we look a lot at how to get pedestrians from the parking lot into the building, or out to the street, out to a trail, regional trail, or a adjacent trail on a local street. And we consider complete streets principles, which complete streets, if you're not familiar with that, is basically designing roads so that you're able to accommodate pedestrians, bicycles, transit, road vehicles on the appropriate roadways. Not on every roadway, but certain roadways you designate for maybe a priority on transit, and other roadways that may be a priority for vehicles. The sixth goal is talk about a system that supports economic vitality of the city and the region. And the strategies listed in plan include providing and protecting connections from freight facilities to the regional system. We'll talk a little bit about that as well under the freight section. Identify and improve suitable truck routes while minimizing impacts. Again, that's trying to make sure that the trucks have routes to go and that are efficient for them and go to the locations that they want to go to. And then invest in improvements that affect and retain businesses. So this is, again, just making sure the investments are lining up with the needs of the business community. The seventh goal in the transportation area is to ensure the transportation system is resilient, sustainable, and able to evolve with technology advances and changes. This is where we're going to get into some of the considering opportunities to improve our ITS system, which is Intelligent Transportation Systems. That's a very broad spectrum of opportunities. Things like we have right now are some of the detection on traffic signals, some of the, those are some of the simpler ones. As you get into more connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, it expands a lot more mainly in other areas of the region, MnDOT and the county and so forth. Trying to mitigate impacts to the environment when constructing and operating the system. Obviously, we want to try to recognize the environment and make sure that we design things that try to minimize or avoid those systems. And then also minimize air quality impacts. Some of those things are done through making sure the signal systems are functioning well and there's not too much delay at an intersection where people are just stopped, idling and not moving. Obviously, an idling vehicle is a lot more worse condition for air quality because they're not moving and not getting anywhere. They're just sitting there idling. The aviation goals, we'll get into that later, so I'll just bypass that for now. I'll start getting into some of the graphics that are contained in the draft report, or draft plan, I should say. So this is the functional classification map. And I apologize, some of these graphics are a little hard to see. They're cut and paste out of the report, and some are a little fuzzy, some are better than others. But this one shows the principal arterials I mentioned earlier, the functional classifications. Principal arterials are the main backbone of our entire system within the region. Within Eden Prairie, it's 494, 212, and 169 are the primary principal arterials. And then the yellow and orange roadways are A minor arterials. And Met Council's classification has a couple different A minor arterials. One's an expander and one's a reliever. For all practical purposes, these are all A minor arterials, which are kind of the next level down from your principal arterials that provide a lot of mobility and limited access. And then we get into the other arterials, which there's a gray. They're hard to see because some of them there's a few other gray lines, but the primary ones that are city A minor arterials are Dell Road between 5 and Pioneer Trail, Mitchell Road from Trunk Highway 212, Highway 5 down to Anderson Lakes Parkway, stretch right in front of City Hall here. And then Prairie Center Drive from Technology Drive all the way around the mall over to West 78th Street. And then the rest of the map has colored alignments are major collectors and minor collectors, which are, again, they could be neighborhood streets, but they probably have a more limited access than driveways for every property. Most of those driveways might be on a secondary or a local street and more limited access than a local street. So as we get into, I should also explain that as part of the transportation chapter of the comp plan, we're also doing a transportation plan for the entire city. So that's a supporting document for the comp plan. We do that we typically do it every 10 years. The last 10 years ago, we did a very minor update. So the last full transportation plan that we did was 20 years ago. So this is looking at the whole network of streets within the city and adjoining areas, and coming up with anticipated traffic volumes and capacity issues and so forth. So what's shown here is some of the data that's used to begin that modeling effort in that transportation plan. So the top chart is some of the demographic information and estimates that the city has. So you can see that in 2017, and then projected out to be in 2040. And then the last column is kind of the net change. So population is expected to increase by almost 19,000 by 2040. Single-family housing units are expected to increase by about 400 units. Multifamily up a little over 7,000 units. And office, commercial, industrial zoning areas are expected to increase by about 4.5 million square feet. Then the chart below is some of the information that Met Council uses, a little different data, but it all kind of correlates with each other. So there they look at population, households, and employment. And so the current, or their population in 2010 for Eden Prairie was 60,800. In 2040, they're projecting a population of 82,400. Households go from 23,900 in 2010 to 33,300 in 2040. Employment numbers, you can see again, go from 48,000, almost 49,000, up to 67,000. So that's the information that we use to develop the, transportation model, and use to predict what we expect the traffic network to be like in 2040. So as I mentioned, the modeling produces the anticipated annual daily traffic volumes. We use what we call TAZs, or traffic analysis zones, that are broken. The city's broken up into several zones with nodes that for example, a neighborhood would have access to maybe 2 or 3 different collectors. So they distribute the traffic into those different collectors, and then distribute it into the system and predict where traffic volumes will be within the network. And then we use some theoretical and qualitative measures used to identify where capacity deficiencies may be. The two we have in the plan are volume and capacity ratios, which is fairly self-explanatory. It's the volume over the capacity of a roadway. If it's 1, then it's obviously at capacity. And normally it's a ratio, it might be less than that. And then levels of service are just a letter grade from A to F, again based on A being very free-flowing traffic, and F being basically overcapacity. In the chart to the right, if we spend a couple seconds looking at that, you can see that the top of the chart has the level of service A, which corresponds to a vehicle capacity ratio of about 0.2, for example. Free flow conditions. The middle, the C or D traffic flow is where you'd see most roads, a lot of roads anyway, where they're flowing quite well, but they're below capacity, but obviously there's quite a bit of traffic on them. And then as you get to the E and F, the bottom of the chart is where you get your approaching capacity or over capacity, and obviously you noticed a lot of delays and significant problems with those roadways, very slow traffic, very slow speeds and so forth, because of its overcapacities. Now this I know you can't read. Even when I had the report, you can hardly read it. But so I did try to zoom in a little bit on the area that's shown around the major center area, which is kind of our main area for traffic. So The top number represents the current traffic volumes, which are actually 2015, 2016 numbers. And then the yellow or gold number underneath it is projected 2040 traffic volumes. So you can see that there's some, and it includes the freeway system, 212 and 494 in this area. And you can see there's quite a bit of growth in some roads, and other roads don't have quite so much. But of note is the Prairie Center Drive goes up quite a bit. One section there right by the Southwest Station goes from 31,000 today to about 47,000 projected. 494 goes from 100 on the west, kind of the west or east leg toward Bloomington, goes from 107,000 today to about 124,000. Similar numbers on 212 between Mitchell and Prairie Center Drive, goes from 107 to 139,000. So obviously there's still traffic growth in the community, and how that gets dealt with. The next graphic kind of puts it in a little more graphical form about where the existing road capacity issues are and the future capacity issues are, or deficiencies. So you can see that what's in yellow there are roadways that are approaching capacity, and then in the blue is their over capacity. So it's got that volume over capacity ratio of over 1. And those are, on the left, it's current. So part is 212, well, actually 5 as it merges away from 212. 169, portions of that. You'll notice Preserve, the south half of Preserve is over capacity, and that's a section we're actually rebuilding next year. It's where there's a restricted, goes from 2 lanes down to 1 lane at the intersection. And then Flying Cloud Drive is another one that's over capacity right by near the mall. If you look to the right, the future roadway capacities, again, based on the modeling, shows many more roads over capacity in 2040. You will note that most of those facilities are regional facilities, state and county. There's only a couple city streets that are part of that, one being Mitchell and Anderson Lakes. The rest of them are, well, and Martin Drive it looks like as well. And these are all backed up by those land use projections, and all that stuff feeds into the modeling. Any questions so far? I'm kind of, yes.
If we can go back to that figure 6, that chart, future. That looks pretty serious. I'm just kind of curious as far as the plans in the future stuff as you're seeing it. Is it going to be that bad? I mean, it's hard, of course, to project out, but is there going to be enough planning, you think, for to alleviate that? Because that's an awful lot of blue. You know?
Yes, and some of those can be a little deceiving. If you look at the one to the existing, for example, that blue section of Highway 5, a lot of that's probably due to the capacity at the intersection of 4 and 5. So it shows a whole stretch there, but that whole stretch is, it could be more of a spot problem than a whole corridor problem.
It's like you're saying it takes regional planning on that too, as far as you're saying.
Yes. Yep. And so obviously these all are facilities that, I mean, Met Council and MnDOT do projections as well, and they've got, they look at all the roads within their network and try to prioritize what where they can provide some funding. MnDOT's goal right now, at least the last few years, has been preservation. They don't have a lot of money for capacity projects, but just recently there was a corridor of commerce money for from regional projects. 494 was one of them, over by Bloomington and Richfield. So there is money occasionally for that, but it all comes through the federal or state.
Thank you.
Commissioner Villarreal.
Thank you. Maybe I missed it, but future the year 2040, or what year is the future?
2040.
2040. Okay, so this is my broken record part. When you're doing your modeling and scenarios, what level are you imputing for both electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, and how that would then change the road use by the vehicles?
Well, the way the modeling works is they have what's it called, travel behavior models that somebody much smarter than me is trying to figure out what trends will be, what it will be like in 20 years, what travel tendencies there'll be. So I think I'm sure there's part of that in there. As we talk about a little later, we'll talk about connected and autonomous vehicles and how you plan for that, how you deal with that. Nobody probably has a crystal ball to know exactly how that's going to work. There's a lot of ideas on how that might work. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of things can impact this. I assume some of these trends are similar, and that we're not deviating dramatically off what's happening today. It's just based on those traffic volumes, but there can be behavior changes over the next couple decades.
Right, because one of the goals is to, I guess, reduce single occupancy vehicle travel. And in thinking about how the roadways are going to be designed, if there's no one driving the car, how does that, that seems to solve a portion of the goal. But if we have another goal that doesn't support the use of, doesn't create either the information or the road or the flow, the traffic flows, or the availability of, either parking or electric vehicle charging networks, we've frustrated the ability to actually do the goal that we want to get done. And to me, that has to, if that's all taken into the modeling that shows up in here, fine. I'm just asking the question again, like, how is it being described as we talk about all this? Because yes, there's EVs, autonomous vehicles, but they're like a paragraph at the last 2 pages of the document, and it's not clear how it's being described in the modeling, because those will change the way the vehicles and people use cars. And if we're building a system assuming that the past continues at its present course, we may be overbuilding, building the wrong place, or underbuilding, or something else entirely. Because if I agree, this plan needs to be flexible enough to address that. Mm-hmm. I just don't see it and either hinted at in this part of the document how this information is all flowing into the traffic patterns.
Yeah, a lot of that information is provided through Met Council's those travel demand patterns and forecasts. Okay. So I'm sure some of that is taken into account by futurists or somebody that look at those trends. Because obviously, if the vehicles go down, there's also a trend nowadays where there's a lot more vehicles or trucks being driven around delivering packages, mm-hmm. for example. Mm-hmm. So that could change a lot. Maybe it's drones, maybe, who knows. But so that there's still going to be a need for transportation infrastructure. It's just a matter of if you end up with connected vehicles, can you reduce the lanes on the freeways from 12 down to 11 or 10 or something? So there's a lot of things that could happen if technology advances to that point.
I'll save my smart cities questions for later, but thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Rod, can we talk just a moment about the jurisdictional coordination on the different roadway systems? When you started out, actually with your goal number 1 about prioritizing investments in A minor arterials, I'm assuming that strategically is worded to say the streets that we have control of as a city. When you showed us the roadway classification map with all those different colors, you pointed out the major arterials, of course that's a interstate, mm-hmm. and then there's a lot of county roads within the city, and State Highway 5, et cetera. So I guess my question is, what's the process of us as a city working with those different jurisdictions as they receive funding or don't receive funding for certain roadway improvements? How much influence do we have and coordination do we have with them to manage the largest roads within our city, which are not city roads?
We have always, as a city, worked with the county and state, and when we see a need out there, whether they see it or not, we try to get them to invest money, budget for that project. Many of these projects, we have a share in those projects as well. Counties more than state, but we work with a lot of those projects to get them off, to get them going, to get funding. In the case where 212 was being planned, there were several delegates that went from all 4 cities along the corridor, went to Washington to try to get funding. And I mean, there's always efforts to try to budget for those needs, and the legislature or MnDOT is going to try to prioritize those funding needs throughout the state and throughout the metro and so forth. So, but it's always that effort going on. And when I get into some other, as we kind of drill down into some projects, you'll see a lot of those needs in the future are on regional systems, not just the corridor here, but actual project locations, which I'll kind of talk about briefly in a minute. So.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Can I ask you one more question on the map? Could you pull that map back up of the future roadway? I assume that it takes into account the light rail being built. Was there another one done if the light rail wasn't built to show what would have been over capacity? I assume there would be a lot more blue. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, it doesn't. This is assuming what the model that's being done is assuming what's programmed. So LRT's is a programmed facility, so that was included, as well if there was any. I mean, there's really no. If 494 was planned to be widened to an extra lane in this location, they would have taken that into account as well if that would have been planned within the next 20 years. Anything they know is included.
Okay.
That they know is going to happen. Obviously, anything out more than about 5-10 years is a little speculative, but so. All right. So now, kind of going down a little more precise. These again, this is kind of a hazy graphic, but you'll see that this shows kind of the anticipated roadway improvements. Not all these are capacity improvements. Some of these are just roadway deficiencies, particularly on some of the local streets. So you'll notice that there's one 6-lane section, and that's Prairie Center Drive between the north ramp of 212 down to Singletree Lane. It's right under LRT, so you can't really see it on the graphic, but that's based on that 47,000 cars projected. That would need to be a 6-lane section through there. When we're working with LRT on the design, we've got that ability to add that extra lane in there. So it's going to be tight, but there is an ability to do that. Then you'll notice the orange and the green are 4-lane roads, at least anticipated to be 4-lane roads. And let's see, Singletree Lane connection over to West 78th Street is included. Pioneer Trail, 101. There's a little section of Valley View, and then there's the 3- and 2-lane sections, which are some of the county road systems and some of the state or some of the city systems. Anderson Lakes Parkway is projected to be a 3-lane. We've talked about some of these through development. You know, we've kind of talked about some of this. We talked about Shady Oak Road a couple months ago. That shows as a projected 3-lane. County Road 4, Valley View Road, several of these. And then these are just planning level. It's not like we're ready to design them as 3-lane or 4-lane facilities. There'd be a lot more work that would be needed to kind of get to that design level. But these are just planning level projections. So and then some of the more orange or the 2-lane ones, the red ones, I guess, most of those are just a lot of city streets that really aren't built to current standards. They're rural, narrow, and don't have good drainage systems and so forth. So those would be anticipated to be reconstructed just to bring them up to a better standard, as well as probably providing pedestrian facilities and so forth as needed. And then here are some of the interchange and intersection improvements that we anticipate in the next 20-some years. So you'll notice that the red or kind of orange circles are interchange improvements. There's 4 of those identified. 1 at 4 and 5, 1 at Prairie Center Drive and Flying Cloud Drive, 1 at Valley View and 212, and then another one at Valley View and 169. So these are all based, again, on capacity and some of those, you saw some of the graphics earlier where it showed capacity issues. Probably the one that we probably would anticipate probably happening the soonest would be the Valley View and 169 interchange. We had discussions with MnDOT, again, getting to your question earlier, we've had discussions with MnDOT back when we were doing the 169 494 interchange. That project, or that interchange was part of that initially, and then they dropped it out with the idea that we would study that and look at that in the future, in the near future. So they kind of talked about 5 years. We began to look at that, which is coming up really soon. So we want to begin to work with MnDOT and try to get that scheduled, prioritized in their program. And then you'll notice several intersection control improvements, the orange circles. Those are mainly traffic control where there might be a signal or roundabout or some other intersection improvement that might be needed. And then there's the blue dots are probably a little bit more significant in that there's already signals there, but it might be, there's more turn lanes, maybe more approach lanes or something that would be needed in those areas. Again, those are all based on traffic projections.
Rod, I have a question for you.
Yes.
My sense is the majority of pedestrian accesses are parallel to the arterials and the minor arterials. Is the city looking at developing more cross-bridging of minor arterials to facilitate movement of pedestrians from one neighborhood to another?
Are you referring to grade separated?
Well, bridging. Or tunneling.
Well, there may be some areas of that, but no, most of them are, a lot of these, and we'll get into the bicycle and ped thing in a minute as well, but a lot of the improvements are more improving the at-grade crossings. There are some potential bridge crossings, but there would have to be pretty significant volumes to justify that, but there are some potential areas that, but they're not identified specifically in here. One of the areas we've talked about is across Flying Cloud Drive from the mall over to the LRT station, for example. That was one that was conceptually talked about, whether that makes sense or where it would be. As we looked at LRT, we were trying to find where there was a logical place that you could even plan for it, because you gotta deal with the grades, and or do you put it all on structure to like a spiral and go over, and so it's not at this point. There's not enough detail to provide a strong recommendation on where they should be. Answer your question.
Commissioner Higgins?
Rod, I have a kind of follow-up to that comment. One other thought is the fact that we have a lot of older folks increasing in the population. So the bridging idea, I know I've heard it talked about by people who look forward to some of the new developments that we're working on now and that we're probably going to have in the future as well, to take care of the needs of people who are going to be moving out of their homes. But they're also going to be moving closer to some of those major traffic areas, and it just seems like it might be one of those things that will sneak up on us if we're not looking. And I just wanted to encourage us to keep imagining, that part of this population change is the older size of our population.
I'd like to piggyback on what Commissioner Higgins said, is when I looked at the projected charts for household growth, the majority was in multifamily units.
Yeah.
My sense is that with multifamily units, those individuals may not necessarily rely on cars. And they're going to be looking at rapid transit, train, electric scooters, and other options. So my concern is some of the anticipated improvements at intersections are near cluster developments. For example, County 4 and 5, you have an apartment complex northeast of that intersection. You have Elam Shores southwest. Valley View and Mitchell Road, you have a large apartment complex northeast. And so my concern is, how will the future projected development of these intersections, the upgrades, accommodate the growth in the multifamily units and the attendant lifestyle changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know there are some areas, 4 and 5 is another area that we looked at as potential for pedestrian crossing. There was actually a study done several years ago for that, but the volumes didn't support it. But I think some of the things we've looked at is trying to look at that intersection as well. Improvements would be just to provide better pedestrian crossings, and then look at how to reconfigure the traffic so that there would be safer pedestrian crossings at that intersection, and less avoidance or less interference with vehicles. So we've looked at some of those on a very conceptual level as well. So the next one shows kind of anticipated roadway connections. Again, these are pretty small little areas, but these are just local streets that are 2 roads come up to each side of a property and try and make those connections. You'll see in the southwest area, the newest part of town has a few more of those connections than other areas. But you'll also note that over by the mall, you'll see that the purple line going north and south, that's the new north-south roadway that would connect the town center station with connecting from Singletree Lane all the way up to Technology Drive, adjacent to the new LRT town center station. And then as far as other transportation priorities that were in the plan include right-of-way preservation, which is really just preserving the right-of-way that we have, providing enhancements in that right-of-way. If we need more right-of-way for pedestrian facilities or bike lanes or something, getting that right-of-way when we have the opportunity, and preserving that right-of-way for those future anticipated needs. The system preservation is really about maintaining what we have. We've got probably rough estimates, $1 billion worth of road investment out there, city streets. And to try to maintain that, have enough funding to maintain that and not let it fall apart and end up with a more expensive problem by having to rebuild it. So we were pretty aggressive on some of our maintenance strategies, and that goes a long way. We built a lot of roads in the 80s and 90s, and they're all coming to that 30, 40 years old, and will require a lot more investment in some of those to keep them going. Access management is really to look at the collectors and arterial system, roadways, I should say, to look at limiting access points, making sure sight lines are protected, make sure their turning movements are properly spacing of intersections and so forth. So that's, again, to make sure that throughput of that arterial is met, both for pedestrians and vehicles and so forth. So the transit systems, the plan talks a lot about transit systems. I'm not going to talk a lot about it tonight because I'm just not that familiar with the whole system. The Southwest Transit bus service obviously we're part of that. We support that. Southwest LRT. There's a number of other services that are provided through transit. There's fixed routes that Southwest Transit has. There's a Metro Mobility service that's a regional system. Southwest Prime, Southwest Flex, reverse commute, feeder routes, and then bus rapid transit. All those are ways of dealing with the needs of the community and trying to meet those needs through transit. And then we'll get into bicycle and pedestrian facilities here in just a minute. We'll talk about those in just one slide, I think, here. So this shows and this is in the plan as well, this shows the existing and anticipated future transit systems. Again, it's very hard to read. I apologize for that. But you can see the Southwest transit routes kind of highlighted in there. Some of them are, the red ones are, that's future LRT, I'm sorry. So they show a number of facilities, and probably of note on this plan is the emerging areas, market areas. So you'll see 3 different kind of shades of yellow, if you will. The darkest yellow is kind of their emerging market, which is around the mall, and then kind of goes out from there where so they have market area 2, 3, and 4 shown there. And they obviously do a very good job of trying to meet their services, match their services with the needs of the area. And as we mentioned earlier about the densities, as densities and transit and so forth become more focused, those facilities will follow, or those transportation improvements will follow as far as their services go. I'll talk a little bit about the bicycle and ped plan, or facilities. So in 2014, the city adopted a bicycle and pedestrian plan that was adopted by council in December of 2014. And in there, the needs were identified, which really talked about considering needs for bikers, walkers, runners, and so forth for all ages and abilities, and came out with a number of recommendations. And some of those recommendations are the 5 highlighted ones were providing a low stress walking and biking network. Low stress being it feels safe to walk or bike on it. On street bike lanes network. Priority intersections and crossing improvements, which we've been working on some of those. Again, it's trying to improve some of those crossings and intersections for pedestrians and bicycles. Priority trail routes. It identified several trail routes within the community that were of a priority. And then LRT access improvements. Again, talk about how we kind of get the public walking or biking to those facilities effectively and safely. So as far as the Aspire plan goals, really support and kind of reemphasize those goals that were identified in that ped and bike plan. Some of those are the network growth, growing the network both regionally and locally, mitigating barriers. Some of those barriers are talking about trying to get across Highway 5, trying to get across Flying Cloud Drive, trying to figure out how to kind of relieve those barriers and provide a safer route. Connectivity to the businesses, parks, our schools, parks, regional trail network and activity areas. Enhancing on-street bike lanes, removing gaps and identifying those gaps, which we have been doing, and Parks has been working at trying to close those gaps, getting some of those gaps built, adding sidewalks where they're missing, improving road crossings. That's another one where, again, trying to provide a safer pedestrian crossing and a more identifiable one. Safety and accessibility for all ages and abilities. Priority improvements, that the plan identified several priority improvements, which we've been working on. And then infrastructure maintenance. Again, we have a large and a robust system of bicycle and pedestrian facilities around town, and keeping that infrastructure maintained and operating safely and effectively. So this one's probably the worst one to read, but this is our bike and ped facilities map that's in the plan, and I'm not gonna probably try to even try to explain some of this, but one of the things that we're working on is to try to identify regional trail corridors. So there's obviously a regional trail corridor through town that's existing on the old railroad tracks or corridor, and trying to support that with some other facilities on county or city streets. Been looking at Hennepin County's plan and trying to make sure everybody's on the same page as far as those regional trail networks and where that focus should be in the coming years. And aviation goals and policies. This is another chapter, another part of the chapter, section of the chapter, really related to aviation. So there's 5 goals within that aviation section. Number 1 is the promote land use compatibility. And that's just reviewing, what we do through that as policies is we review developments that are near the airport, make sure the land uses are appropriate. We monitor the implementation of the final agreement. There was a final agreement that was adopted back, I don't remember how many years ago, that kind of defined what the airport uses would be, and supporting that, what they called a minor use airport. So it was trying to focus what the airport was about and how that all works within the city. Goal 2 is about airport noise. That's just supporting, making sure that Met Council's land use compatibility guidelines are met and adopted through developments, and noise abatement programs where appropriate. 3 and 4 are kind of similar in that protecting safety zones within and around the airport. So again, we support those, or we review some of, as developments are proposed near the airport, we review some of the airspace criteria and so forth. Number 5, airport zoning district. So this is developing a zoning district for the airport, around the airport, and providing municipal utility services for the airport, which they have on many areas of, they've got sewer and water through many of those hangar areas. Developing the standards for that airport zoning district, replacing some of the deteriorating hangars that are out there, encouraging landscaping around those, the airport property.
That's my pet peeve.
And then the freight system, this is, again, just a small component of the transportation plan, but the freight system, this shows the map of that. And you can see we've got the colored lines are the commercial traffic, and we've got some fairly intense corridors for trucks, 494 and 169 being the primary ones. Over 5,000 trucks a day on those 2 roads. And then you can see on the orange, 212 and 169 going to the north are in that 2,500 to 5,000 trips per day for truck traffic. And one thing to note on this is that you can see some of our land uses that are kind of compatible with truck usage, commercial and industrial areas, are pretty much aligned pretty closely to our main freight routes. So we don't see a lot of areas where they have to travel through or adjacent to a lot of neighborhoods in order to get access to the regional system. So, and the last, some of the last things is the section on planning for the future. This is a section in the comp plan that kind of looks at what we're going to do in the future. So system preservation, I mentioned earlier, that's trying to keep our network that we have functioning and in good shape. So we have performance measures and project prioritization. Some of that is done through our pavement management system. So we look at trying to track our streets and try to invest in those streets when appropriate and where appropriate. Try to identify revenue sources that can maintain that infrastructure for decades to come. We're pretty aggressive in maintenance techniques that try to preserve that pavement, and we try new things, and some things work, some things don't, but we're trying out there to keep our roads in good shape. Then travel demand management. that's again trying to demand or trying to look at facilities or businesses so that they can try to use the roadway network in off-peak hours as much as possible. It could be telecommuting, could be providing showers, facilities at businesses so that people can bike to work and have a way of showering when they get there. Complete Streets initiatives, which again we talked about, and connected and autonomous vehicles, which again we'll be monitoring how that infrastructure is working in the future and how we can kind of help that industry whenever that kind of, we're going to have to be more reactive to that because we're not going to be on the leading edge of that because it's going to have to be more of a state-led or regional-led type situation. But with that, I guess I'll take any further questions. Otherwise,
Any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Villarreal.
So, one of the topics I expected to show up in this document, in this chapter, and maybe it's in another chapter, is the discussion around a smart city. And the reason why I sort of expected it in this one is because of the impact that information can have on the planning of the transportation system in the city. Around, you have lights. We have lights. You can put sensors on the lights. The sensors are connected to the wireless network. The wireless network then tells the city planners in close to real time how often a street or a location is being used, how many cars are going across that sensor, and you can follow it all the way along across the city. Having that type of information seems to me vital in planning for and implementing any of these plans that are outlined in this document. So I'm wondering, what is the city's plans for implementing and utilizing advanced technologies such as traffic monitoring systems that can be placed on top of Excel lights or city light poles to provide and to collect and then use that information more effectively in implementing these plans?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, the MnDOT has secured funding for a traffic management system that I think is supposed to be designed or constructed in 2020, and it's within Eden Prairie and in the major center area. So I don't know exactly what that will entail, but it's a pretty extensive. It was over $1 million of grant money that they've got, or legislative appropriation that they got to do this system. So it involves signals, it involves cameras, it involves a lot of stuff. So I don't know a lot of the details, but that will be coming. So,
will that, what type of roads will those systems be implemented across?
it'll be the state roads, county roads, Prairie Center Drive. There's city streets that'll be part of that. So that whole major center area will be a part of that network. So we're a part of it, the county's a part of it, and the state's a part of it. State's leading that effort, but we're partners in that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Rod.
All right.
All right, moving on, it looks like we have water resources up next. Good evening.
Hi. Good evening, Commission members. My name is Dave Madro. I'm a water resource engineer with the city in the Public Works Department. Rick Willeen and I will go over some of the three main components of the water resources and infrastructure chapter. The chapter is broken up into three major sections. It's the surface water, water supply, and wastewater. I'll go over surface water while Rick will touch on water supply and wastewater. We'll start with surface water, and in the interest of time, I'm going to breeze through some of these slides pretty quickly, so if you have a question, just feel free to interrupt me, and we'll keep things moving along. All right. So the Met Council's requirements for the surface water portion are pretty straightforward. They require the cities to adopt a local water management plan that's consistent with the Met Council's goals and policies. So those plan requirements include executive summary, water resources management related agreement summary. You need to include a physical environment and land use description. Also identify existing and potential water resource related problems. Put together an implementation plan, and then finally a process for amending your plan. The Aspire 2040 actually adopts the city's current local water management plan by reference, and it includes the executive summary in Chapter 9. So a lot of the information has already been approved by council. It's a little bit of a different timing as the water resources part got put in front of the rest of the comprehensive plan. The reason for that is there's 3 watershed districts in the city, and also by Minnesota statutes, you have to have an approved water management plan that's approved by those watershed districts as you're going through and getting things like grants approved and other regulatory goals for the city. So you have to, beginning with that, we began compiling our current local water management plan back in 2013 and 2014 in response to some of the watershed districts' water plans being developed. And we followed the Conservation Commission, who had some goal setting sessions to kind of kick off that process. So when they started that drafting the plan, the intent was always to meet the Met Council's requirements for the 2017 and 2018 comprehensive plan update. So the idea going forward is that the watershed districts will rewrite their plans every 10 years, and that timeline will kind of correspond with the comprehensive planning of the city, so people aren't writing and reacting to plans over and over again, which is going to be somewhat the case with this round, but going forward, ideally things are more on the same schedule where we're updating these major rewrites every 10 years. So a little history, the 60-day draft plan was distributed for public comment back in July of 2015. Final draft was distributed in March of that year and finally adopted by City Council in 2016 in September. We recently just updated our stormwater capital improvement plan, which we do every 2 years. And with that, we included that in a submittal to the Met Council along with this updated local water management plan for inclusion in the Aspire 2040 comp plan. So in August of 2017, the Met Council approved, or basically they say they don't approve, but they review for conformance to the requirements of the Met Council. They provided us a letter stating that we fulfilled those requirements for inclusion in our 2017-2018 comprehensive plan update. So basically that legwork for the surface water portion was kind of completed over the last 5 years and then updated to include some of our capital programs going forward to extend it over the next 10 years. So what I'm going to do today, the executive summary is what you read in the current draft of the Aspire 2040 plan. And that's also, it's pretty close match to what's in the actual local water management plan itself, with a few dates updated. Other than that, there's 9 chapters and I'll go over each one just real briefly here. So chapters 1 and 2 are the introduction and the regulatory framework for the city, and it really explains the purpose of the plan and all of the applicable statutes and all of the players that have a say in surface water management within the city. It gets a really long list. It's kind of explains how many different agencies and groups are involved in local water planning. The first thing it discusses is relationships to our other city plans, which previously we had a local drainage plan and a wetland protection and management plan. Those two are kind of combined into this document. And it also references our stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is our MPCA, a plan that we have for our municipal sewer permit with the state. And it also discusses our current city ordinances and policies. Going forward, then it discusses our relationships to the other regulatory agencies and plans, and that includes both the Minnesota rules for local water management and the Wetland Conservation Act. It also references the MPCA water quality standards, the United States Army Corps Engineer Clean Water Act documents, Met Council Water Resources Policy, and then the 3 watershed district water management plans that I discussed earlier. So all these people, when we're putting together the plan, had a chance through the 60 and 90 day review periods to submit comments and eventually approve the plan as well. So that chapter 1 and 2 kind of explains how all of that, how all of those relationships work. Chapter 3 is our water resources inventory. Kind of looks through all of our current systems, and then it also looks into some of the future planning for land use. It goes over our physical environment, which is the geology, soils, and climate. The biological environment, which would be some of the trees and some of the biology of the current lakes. The human environment, which is our land use, our parks, and our pollutant sources in the city. Goes over the specific watersheds for each water body. And then it also gives a inventory of our surface water features like our creeks, lakes, and rivers. And then it also briefly talks about groundwater, which there's a lot of overlap with what Rick's going to talk about as well. So chapter 4 is our problems, issues, and requirements chapter. Basically, based on all this regulatory background and inventory, a list of the water resources and all of our issues was developed. They developed this table that goes over all the issues that were identified and that came through the Conservation Commission and public outreach, and they go over 7, or how many are here? 8 of our major issues, including water quality conditions, regulatory and operational requirements, our recreational needs, the maintenance requirements, our gaps in education and outreach, our financial resources for stormwater and surface water, groundwater protection issues, and any opportunities for additional collaboration throughout the city.
Could you tell me what impaired waters means?
So an impaired water is a state standard that's with the MPCA. So there's a list of criteria that shallow lakes have, that creeks have, and then deeper lakes have, and they're usually based on metrics like water clarity, water quality. They can be for chlorides, which is a big push in water resources with the amount of salt on the road. So there can be impairments for chlorides, for nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen that produce algae blooms and some of the unwanted aquatic vegetation. So the MPCA will list these waters as impaired, and then eventually the MPCA puts together what's called a total maximum daily load, and then cities have to show progress in meeting these total maximum daily loads. So, for example, they will set a criteria for how much phosphorus a city is allowed to discharge to a certain water body. So Starring Lake is impaired for nutrients. So we have to show we have to show our improvement plan, and we have to show that we're making progress towards eliminating some of those phosphorus contributors to that watershed. So you can go through then and once they meet these certain metrics, and they can be removed or added to an impaired or special water search.
And all of ours are impaired?
Not all of them. Mitchell and Red Rock are being delisted this year. The creeks are being listed for nutrients, and then turbidity, which is too much sediment in the water. Offhand, I can't list all the impairments, but they're, you know, on the east side of town where 9 Mile Creek has done a lot of our lake water quality projects are in better shape. Some of the lakes with the newer development around Starring and Riley are both impaired for nutrients right now as well. Then they also look at things like E. coli and for fecal coliform, and some of those are a little harder to target, and those are usually dealing with like goose droppings and things. They're hard to figure out what the source is for an E. coli impairment. So,
Thank you.
so with all these issues, it kind of rolls into Chapter 5, which is our goals and policies. There's 7 major goals, and then and the corresponding policies that were addressed in the local water management plan. I'll go through each one of them. The first one is, goal 1 is to work to achieve water quality standards in the lakes, streams, and wetlands consistent with the intended use and classification and state of Minnesota water quality standards. So this goes into a little bit about just what we talked about, trying to meet these state standards for turbidity, nutrients, and then meet the use that we're trying to obtain. And some of the policies that were put in place are to require no net increase in total suspended solids or sediment and total phosphorus in all development and redevelopment. So when a new development comes in, at a minimum, they can't make things worse than they already are. So it's usually, that's a higher bar on a new development site than it is for redevelopment. But the city chose, since we have 3 watershed districts with their own rules as well that are a little more geared towards redevelopment, we decided to keep our rules consistent with the MPCA standards that we're held to, that work on that non-degradation standard, so we're not increasing sediment and phosphorus loads with development. Along with this one, we're also partnering to restore creek corridors and lead by example for city, with our own city projects, and manage our own properties responsibly. Goal two is to protect downstream water resources and reduce the potential for flooding. There's a lot of policies listed here. The majority of them get at setting flood control design requirements, and then also applying some conservative freeboard requirements for new development. So we typically set our ponding areas to that 100-year flood frequency, and then on top of that we require some amount of freeboard and usually that's 2 feet above a calculated 100-year elevation, or 1 foot above the emergency overflow. So you do some of that design work, and then you build in some freeboard from those calculations as well. So that's just to protect those, and a lot of that language is within our new floodplain ordinance that was developed this year. We also require compensatory storage for flood impact. So if somebody wants to fill a floodplain, they have to find a place to replace that somewhere, typically on the site or on the same water body. We encourage the reduction of impervious areas in development whenever we can. If we can reduce the amount of parking or the parking stall size, or eliminate some, or even including pervious pavement options, that's something we look to do to reduce impervious. And then finally, we want to promote volume and control best management practices at kind of a smaller scale through our cost share programs. So that allows people to build rain gardens or rain barrels or other reuse type projects using cost share monies through the city's programs. Goal 3 is to protect and or restore our wetlands to improve or maintain their functions and values. And this is all in accordance with the Wetland Conservation Act. So the city is the Wetland Conservation Act local governing unit for the Riley Purgatory Watershed District and the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District. And then in the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, they're the local governing unit. It's all the same set of standards, but there's a process that you go through to see who's the local governing unit, who has the ultimate say in some of those decisions. The local water management plan talks about the policies for wetland protection are to keep administering the Wetland Conservation Act, maintain an updated inventory of all of the wetlands we have, and also continue to require the establishment and maintenance of our wetland buffers. So when a new development comes in, we typically get an easement or an outlot over a wetland, and we also require a buffer to protect that resource. Let's see, goal 4 is work to prevent the contamination of our aquifers and promote groundwater recharge, and also encouraging water conservation practices. And this is where there's some crossover with our water supply plan, but what we're looking to do with our policies is to continue to implement our wellhead protection plan, and promote infiltration and groundwater recharge. So a lot of those stormwater features that are designed to keep that flow out of our stormwater system and reduce that stress. It also is getting back into the groundwater to recharge our aquifers. So there's some dual benefit with that. We're also requiring a proper well abandonment, as well as providing water conservation education and quite a few water conservation incentives through some of our rebate programs and through the Sustainable Eden Prairie initiatives. Goal 5 is to control or manage sediment discharge into surface water resources and drainage ways. The policies we have here are really closely tied to the MPCA standards, and then even at a smaller level that captures some of the smaller projects that don't get captured in the 1 acre requirement that the state has for their construction stormwater permit. Our policies look at requiring erosion and sediment control training for city staff, and also requiring management of construction stormwater using the proper best management practices, and those are usually posted. MnDOT has new best management practices and manuals that they update regularly, as well as the Minnesota Stormwater Manual. It's put out by the Pollution Control Agency. Goal 6 is to support water recreation activities and fish and wild habitat by implementation of programs to maintain or improve our water quality. A big piece of this, and that's reflected in our policies, is to preserve all these natural features. It's to preserve buffers. It's to control the spread of aquatic invasive species, explore new recreational opportunities, maintain the natural beauty of our creek corridors and our lakes, and finally kind of control the migration and population of rough fish like carp in the waters, which are a big problem in Starring Lake and have contributed to the water quality and fisheries. So there's ongoing work with the watershed districts on eliminating the rough fish and the carp that have been a problem. The last goal is to increase public involvement and knowledge in the management and protection of water resources. The city, and it's also reflected in these policies, but we offer a lot of educational opportunities and information on water resources, but we also want to increase some of our volunteer opportunities and include the public when considering new policies. Finally, want to maintain and expand on those demonstration projects we have around the city, like the new Fire Station 2 reuse system and the sand filter bench on Starring Lake, and some of the native landscape areas that the city is converting over the years here. So Chapter 6 is our implementation plan, and it really pairs the issues that are identified in Chapter 4 with the goals and policies in the Chapter 5 to create our implementation plan. It's really kind of broken up into 4 main tools that we have. Permitting and enforcement deals with our current and revised ordinances, and those are our development and redevelopment standards, as well as our land alteration permits, and working on keeping those updated with our MS4 and construction stormwater permits with the MPCA. So that's staying on top of the requirements that we have to control construction stormwater and any illicit discharges or anything to protect our stormwater. That's part of those MPCA permits. And then also it's issuing those administering the Wetland Conservation Act through our city ordinance. And it's also done with our programs and projects, and that's our education and outreach plan, our regular maintenance and operations of our stormwater utility, and then through our capital plan. Chapter 7 deals with our funding considerations. Funding source, the primary funding source is our stormwater utility fee. We just completed a rate study in 2017 along with water and wastewater utility fees. And this graphic is just pulled from there, but it looks at our operating reserve and capital reserve, and whether we're reinvesting enough into our stormwater system, as well as keeping those reserves in good shape going forward. So that is by far the primary source of all the funding of our capital plan and our regular maintenance and operations. And that's with this current rate study, we'll be in good shape to do a lot of good work in our capital plan, and with our ongoing programs as well. In addition to that, there's always watershed district funding. We try to pair a lot of our projects with the timing of the watershed district. They have a capital plan, and there's a lot of coordination recently to, if we have a project going on, say at Duck Lake Road, it's to incorporate something. If there's a impairment or a specific issue at Duck Lake Road, it's to try to improve the water quality with one of our roadway projects. So some of those things are aligned, so we can pool resources to get those projects completed. And then there's also the Clean Water Fund grants, Department of Natural Resources grants, and Pollution Control Agency grants, which are usually aimed at those TMDLs and waste load allocations that I was talking about before.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
Could you go back to the last slide?
Yeah.
Okay, the dashed line, does that represent an increase every year for customer bills?
Those are the average residential rate changes that were approved with this last rate change. Yep. So it was a 15% over the next 2 years, 8% in 20 and 21, and then flat at 3% following that.
So every year, and that's to what part of the bill? What is that 3% increase attached
That shows up on, it's your utility bill, correct? It's so that
Is it on the fixed charge or on the usage? Or is it on the stormwater fee, or is it on?
Stormwater utility fee. So I can't remember offhand what the average residential rate was, but it's in that, it's in the dollar range, like $3 to $4 quarterly. And we looked at how we stack up with all of our regional comparables, and the city is compared to the amount of water resources we have with the creeks and the river and all the wetlands, we're in really good shape. I think this brings us up to a lot of where other people are with their utility rates, and I think there's just been recently kind of an update of what everybody did in 2017, and the city is kind of right in the middle where we want to be with room to grow. But you can kind of see that pink bar is our capital reserve, where right now it's pretty low. We don't have a lot of reserve funds. It may look aggressive at 15%, but the goal is really to get that capital reserve and our operating expenses where they should be. Where
Okay, so
finances come
I'm going to have some questions on this because my day job is doing utility rate design stuff. So in the chapter, one of the conservation programs is rainwater collection.
Yeah.
Have you modeled what the impact on the rainwater collection will be, knowing that water won't then flow through and won't flow into the city systems? Have you guys estimated what the loss will be from rainwater collection?
From stormwater collection,
Yeah.
and then reuse for something like irrigation or
Yeah.
or non-potable use.
Well, if I put a bunch of collectors on my house,
Right.
there's less water that's going to flow in, at least immediately, into the stormwater system.
Right.
So presumably it'll be made up somewhere else, I suppose, either through irrigation, but that's less water that's immediately flowing through the stormwater collection. So that's got to result in
Yeah.
less money recovered.
Less money recovered.
Yeah, still, less water will be flowing through the stormwater drains.
Right. So that's really the goal of reuse, is to mimic existing or pre-settlement conditions to remove that. So are you talking from a rate study?
From a revenue collection.
From a revenue, it doesn't matter. It's based on acreage and usage. So it's a standard residential rate and then acreage from a commercial standpoint. So the amount of water you're actually discharging it doesn't factor into the rate schedule.
Okay.
Not like in water, though. You're right. So we have all these conservation practices, and people are buying less water. That is something that's factored into those models,
So-
but it's not. It's different from a stormwater.
Okay, so doing rainwater collection is not actually saving anyone any money, other than the rebate they'll get for implementing one.
Yeah, I guess that would be fair. The only other secondary benefit would be if you're reusing it for irrigation, you're not paying for
Yeah,
water.
okay.
Yeah.
How much of looking at your budget? How much is uncollected on the revenue side? So the water is, you have some amount of acre feet that goes in, and then you bill some amount of acre feet that's been used, and those don't average out because of evaporation and uncollected water. So what percentage of your annual operation costs are made up of uncollected water revenue?
So typically when we have a new development, we'll look at what area that we will charge our stormwater rate to. So if you have a facility that has a lot of wetlands or is on a creek corridor, we'll actually reduce the stormwater fee based on the amount of usable acreage on that site.
Okay.
So I know what you're getting at.
I'm talking about the usage, not the home usage. There's some amount of water that is delivered in the system for everyone to use at their home or business, and some amount of that water is lost, either because evaporation, leakage, or theft, we'll call it, or the meter isn't accurate. So I'm just curious, there's some amount of money that's not collected through usage, and how much is that?
Sure, and Rick will get into that with
Okay,
our
then
water supply.
I'll do all
With
those.
Stormwater, we don't have meters. We don't meter stormwater. We want to
Okay.
reduce the amount of water coming off every site, and it's a flat fee based on acreage. So
Okay.
it is different. I'm only talking about one part of the water cycle, but that is a big that's a big piece of what Rick's gonna talk about in our water supply.
I thought we were talking about water.
Yeah, it's all, this is surface water, and then Rick will talk about water supply, which is more getting into our pulling from our aquifers. Then there is that exactly what you're talking about, with the issue of unmetered water. So going forward, like I said, the Met Council has approved our local water management plan for inclusion into the comprehensive plan, but we do expect with the 3 local watershed districts have all just recently approved their new 10-year plans. We expect minor updates to our current local water management plan to bring our plan into conformance, and that'll be just updating some ordinance to reflect new rules or standards that may come out of those, as well as some more administrative things like changing the updated plan dates and some of those pieces. But we don't expect any major revisions to our local water management plan going forward. Then we also look at our capital improvement plan every 2 years, and that's kind of updated as one of the appendices in the local water management plan. And then we're continually doing ordinance revisions related to our local water plan and the water district plan, watershed district plans as well. And then I'll open it up to any more questions.
Commissioner Farr. So as a consumer of the ordinance and water quality myself, since we have the 3 watershed districts and you're having the local watershed program yourself, trying to touch base on all of those requirements, is the objective to have a consistent set of rules for building anywhere in Eden Prairie? Are you taking the worst or most stringent requirement from each watershed district's list of requirements to making it city policy? Or I don't want to overstate that. See where I'm going with it?
So what the city's decided to do is that we have our permit with the Pollution Control Agency, which is our municipal stormwater permit, and there's rules that they have set in. Those are what's reflected in the city's ordinance. 9 Mile Creek Watershed District and Riley Purgatory Creek Watershed District have their own governing authorities and rules. They have a board and they require their own administrative process. So our rules don't adopt any of them by reference. Now, the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District is a little different. They do not have rule authority, so we do have to adopt ordinances that are at least as restrictive as their current plan. So their plan that was updated in the last 6 months, over the last year or so, pretty closely follows the MPCA's standards and the city standards as well, so we don't anticipate a lot of wholesale changes to those requirements. And that's kind of a process we went through over the last year, to come to some conclusions there.
Okay.
So yeah, it's different with the 3 watershed districts, but the more restrictive Riley and 9 Mile have their own rules that they do have to follow.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Sure. I'll pass it on to Rick then.
Well, I bet you're dying to hear what we do about those people that don't pay their water bill.
We all pay for it.
Well, in actuality, we have many more than you might expect, and it's not due to lack of ability, but there's a lot of people who prefer to roll over their water bill for the entire year to their annual taxes. Our finance department certifies unpaid finance bills to the taxes of each resident, and I don't know if they think that by doing that they get to write it off. Technically you can, or you're not supposed to, but I've seen as many as 100 in 1 year. But our policy is we don't go after water bills by turning off the water to the home. But annually in September, finance certifies that overdue bill to taxes, so that's collected.
So I don't mean to cut you off before we even start your presentation, but uncollected revenue is then just subsidized by everybody else. And it seems to me that having a more accurate metering system and billing system is a way to help address uncollected revenue, either because of the old meters or leakages. And having more information about, the water system would help address uncollected revenues, which would
Sure.
be savings to everybody at that point.
If I could very quickly address that. We're very proud of the fact that we've got a 0% meter inaccuracy initiative that my meter team has been really working on for about 10 years now. With respect to the metering technology that we have, we do recognize that it's not state of the art. However, the accuracy of those meters when compared and adjusted and evaluated is right there. We don't anticipate that is going to change much in the next few years, but meters as they get older do wear, and when they wear out, a mechanical meter tends to err on the side of the person who is getting the water, not the utility. So we're very conscious of the fact that in the future we could be losing revenue because of that. So we're staying on top of that very closely. We average 6-7% maximum unaccounted for water annually, and most of that's probably through accounting. We've identified all kinds of ways that our water has been consumed, and if there's ever an opportunity for it to be metered where it's not, we've already got those. So,
Well, let's talk about AMI later then.
okay. How do I turn this on? There we go. Wonderful. My name is Rick Walling. I'm manager of utility operations. My team are the people that work for the city of Eden Prairie and take care of the water, the stormwater, and the sewer system for our residents. And we're responsible to make sure that our future planning efforts to provide water and sewer services to the public, and also to convey the water appropriately off the streets and rooftops are managed properly. The water supply plan is an effort for us that is just as detailed as what Dave described for the local water management plan. It's a multi-year effort, and in years past it was called the emergency supply plan, the water supply and emergency conservation plan. That was updated every 10 years. The state DNR in charge of that process decided that if every community in the state were to submit their emergency supply plan at the same time, there's no way that they could evaluate that in a calendar year. So they broke it up into segmented sections for different towns in the state. We came out in year 3, so 2003, 2013, 2023. Every 10 years that plan is due. So the plan that we have just been working on for the comprehensive plan is kind of like a rehash of what's already been done. However, the detailed aspect of it has been provided to us by DNR, and it's already been submitted and approved. And what I have for you in today's briefing, and what's included in text form in the comprehensive plan, is a short summary of all the segments of that plan. The purpose is to help our local water suppliers to plan for the future, to be sustainable, and to conserve and identify specific ways in which they will do that, and also to fulfill the statutory obligation to provide a plan that the state called for a number of years ago. What I like to call the other purpose, though, is bullet number 2. We aren't allowed to apply for a drinking water revolving loan fund grant or loan unless a water supply plan is approved. We're not allowed to submit requests for new wells that we might need to respond to our future growth unless a water supply plan is in place. And the last bullet there, it allows DNR to look at all of these plans that are submitted collectively and develop a much better database on what's going on with the water supply system in Minnesota to ensure that collectively we can do the right thing to manage the resource. The water supply plan is organized in these bullets that you see ahead of you. Each one of those is a specific portion of the plan itself, and it's alluded to briefly in the comprehensive plan document. As I mentioned, we submitted ours in 2013. For the purposes of the comprehensive plan, ours was due to DNR in October, and we've received acceptance of that plan as of December of 2017. Historical water use is one of the first bullets that appeared on a previous slide as a component of the water supply plan. What you see about the historical water use is that we're definitely seeing a significant change, and we like to think a change for the better. There's been an overall reduction in the last 10 years, despite a growth of 4,000 people in the city of Eden Prairie between 2007 and 2016. We've seen the winter quarter water use diminish, which is an indication to us that in the winter, there's not a lot of habitual lifestyle change going on that would affect how people use water. It must be because of the water conserving appliances that we've been asking people to put in place. We provide a rebate program that I'll talk about a little bit later that encourages people to do that. And if we look at the total use in our community, in 2007, we had a per capita water demand usage for the entire community of 165 gallons per capita. In 2016, that was 112. That's a significant reduction. Per capita is per person. DNR has established a goal of 75 gallons per capita per day for the communities that participate in the planning process. We reached that goal in 2015 and 2016, so we're already there. As part of our Sustainable Eden Prairie, we've been looking at more aggressive goals than what DNR has provided, and the water supply plan itself is asking for us to reach a goal of 70. However, the Sustainable Eden Prairie goal is going to be even more aggressive than that, just to encourage people to do the right thing. Our water demand projections utilize the population numbers that the Metropolitan Council has provided each community on a 10-year basis. Of note here, when we look back over the last 5 years, we see that the ratio of our projected maximum demand for any given period of time compared to the average demand is a factor of 2.41. And that's based on our actual data that we have derived from our own meters. So we're using a peaking factor of 2.41 when we make our assessments about future growth. Contained within the plan is a summary of the existing system, water system, and it's broken down by the water source, the water supply, the water treatment system, the water distribution and the water storage system, and ultimately the manner in which it's metered and future growth is planned. The existing system consists of a 28 million gallon per day lime softening treatment plant. At the plant, we have 2.5 million gallons of storage, and it's interesting to note that of that 2.5 million gallons of storage, we only have 1.5 million gallons available to us. Primarily because the elevation of that tank and the pumps within that tank are unable to suck it dry, because if they do, they'll cavitate and pull air, and the bottom amount of water just cannot be drawn out of those tanks. So it's misleading if I tell you we've got 2.5 million gallons of storage at the plant. We have 5 million gallons of elevated storage in 3 water towers throughout the town. We have 15 groundwater wells, all of which can provide almost 23 million gallons a day. We have emergency interconnections on the north, on the west, and on the east of us with our adjoining communities. We believe we can acquire about 10 million gallons per day from all of those if we were to experience a need for that. And you'll probably be happy to know that there's no other practical alternative water supply, because the proximity of us to the Minnesota River makes that a natural question as to why aren't we using that? And it's not practical just because of the treatment aspects necessary and the real water quality challenges that we would have with the Minnesota River. However, it has been looked at. Included in the water supply plan is the emergency response plan, and that was a significant part of the previous water supply planning documents that we've offered in the past. Our city code section allows us to enforce water supply restrictions. It gives us the authority to act in order to maintain a water supply for all. And it also allows us to prioritize our water use based upon functional category. Of note, our wells numbers 6 and 7 can pump directly into the distribution system without passing through the water treatment plant. So if our water treatment plant were to conk out, we'd still be able to get water from those 2 wells without treatment. We do have plans, however, that if the plant fails to function, but we still have the pumping capacity at the water treatment plant, we still would be able to draw water through the plant and pass it on to the consumers without going through lime softening. The main need that we have at the water treatment plant, for any kind of treatment whatsoever is to reduce the hardness and the minerals in the water, and also to provide disinfection to the water to ensure that when you get it at your house, it's still germ-free after passing through all the miles of distribution system. We can do that without operating a lime softening treatment plant if we need to. Also included within the water supply plan is the source water protection program. We do that through a vigorous system that we employ of leak detection. Every year we look at least a third of the city through a leak detection program. You'd be surprised what we find, but over the years it's been going down and down and down. We find about 3 to half a dozen leaks in the entire third of the city each year, and we immediately proceed to repair those leaks. Our unaccounted for water by standard is supposed to be less than 10%. However, we're finding that 6 to 7 is generally where we're at. And in fact, some of the things that we've been doing to get there has been used by the Metropolitan Council as an example for other communities on efforts that they can do as well. The other aspect of source water protection is our wellhead protection plan. This is another 10-year document that's submitted on off-cycle years with the comprehensive plan. It consists of a chapter of all the science behind what our water supply is, the aquifer system from which it comes, and also potential contaminant sources for that water supply. And then there's another portion of that chapter, or that protection plan, which prescribes how are we going to proceed in the next 10 years to ensure that we protect that water supply. The water conservation plan is a component of the water supply plan. And basically we take a look at a thorough rate analysis and ensure that we're generating enough revenue to take care of all the business of supplying water to the public. That's revised periodically. Roughly every 5 years we take a thorough look at that and revise our rate schedule in order to accommodate change. I mentioned leak detection. We've got one of the most exhaustive education programs of any community in the metropolitan area. And in 1997, that's when we both began our planning for the Environmental Education Center and our rebate program. And in 1998, when we opened the doors to the Environmental Education Center, we kicked that off with a public rebate program, tied the two together, and we've just had hundreds and hundreds of local children, not only from Eden Prairie, but from the adjoining communities, go through our education center. And we believe a significant part of the values that we see in our community about water supply and water conservation has stemmed from there, because how many times have your kid, when seatbelt law first came into place, would tell you, Dad, put on your seatbelt. Kids are really good about helping parents do the right thing. And then, of course, demonstration projects. One that we're kind of proud of, I say kind of because it's still being proved out, is a water reuse project over at Fire Station number 3. After taking a look at Eden Prairie's rebate program, the Metropolitan Council decided that they would start to offer some grants to help communities do the right thing with both water conservation and water reuse. So we participated in the very first grant program that the Met Council provided, and constructed a water reuse facility, taking rainwater from a large roof at Fire Station number 2. And that water is then subsequently treated to allow it to be used for washing fire trucks and for irrigating various portions of the property. This was the very first year that it's been in place, and we'll see how that works in the years to come. But we did receive also grant money from the Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District, so that it could be an education model for our citizens. And so it includes a lot of signage and education material and examples on site that people can take a look at to help them do similar things at their homes and residences. And then as a final part of the water supply plan, our capital improvement and operating budget, that's just a portion of the plan that helps both the Metropolitan Council and ourselves understand the importance of taking care of our infrastructure and how much it costs to not only take care of it, but to plan for the future and to sustain it for our future generations. So the next step of the Water Resources Plan is our wastewater plan. The purpose of the wastewater plan is to help us see what the conditions of the sanitary sewer might be, assuming that the future growth and the future development is achieved. It's also to anticipate future changes to the system so that we might more adequately plan for what's necessary. And it's also to allow for development of a sustainable capital improvement program, something that that we've been pretty thorough and deliberate about. Our plan organization is basically twofold: a discussion of the existing sanitary sewer system, and also an outline of our future planning information that's both important to us and to the Metropolitan Council. Specifically with the wastewater system, each community in the Metropolitan Council service area sends its sanitary sewage through a common collector system to common treatment done by the MCES, Metropolitan Council of Environmental Services. They're really interested in our growth, both in population and industrial growth, because that could have a distinct impact on their ability to provide the service that they do. And so they're specifically and very keenly interested in our wastewater plan. The plan consists of a summary of our gravity sewer system, our lift stations, our interceptors, our connections with those interceptors, large sewer users that we may have, and our existing wastewater flows, and an analysis of the historical development of those flows and what that might lead us to in the next portion of the chapter. The future planning information, which follows our existing sanitary sewer description, talks about our population employment projections. It uses those numbers and an analysis of our planning and zoning ideas about what this community will look like in the future years, and has a considerable amount of mathematical calculations that arrive at what will be the anticipated sewage flows based on the type of districts and how this community is organized. It talks about our trunk systems. Are they adequate? Will they provide the needed sewage capacity in the future? There needs to be a review of our individual sewage treatment systems within our community. Is that something that we anticipate will change over time? And of course, inflow and infiltration has a significant impact on sewage systems throughout the metro. And the Metropolitan Council in this chapter wants to see what is our plan for inflow and infiltration to mitigate it or to eliminate it if at all possible. And then a review of our capital improvement process to ensure that our sewage system is taken care of as well. So our gravity sewers, one thing that is probably most important to remember about this is that in a lot of communities, it's very common to see at least 50% of the city that contains 6-inch, maybe even smaller sanitary sewer mains. That's because as your community is small, it doesn't need large pipe. Eden Prairie, when it began in the 70s, had the foresight to know that we're probably going to grow. And why should we spend money on small pipe that later has to be dug up and replaced with big pipe? So all of our neighborhood mains are 8-inch sanitary sewer pipe, which has eliminated all of our future planning restrictions on our neighborhood growth. We have plenty of capacity in our sewer mains. The trunks, we have gone, instead of an 8-inch trunk system, we've gone to 10s and 12s, mostly 12-inch main. That allows a much larger surface area to be collected. And again, when we look at the analysis of all the anticipated flows from each of the sewer districts in Eden Prairie, we see an overcapacity rather than an undercapacity. We've got 263 miles of sewer and 15 miles of Metropolitan Council interceptor sewers running through our community. Our lift stations, we've got 22. 20 of them are significant to us. They range in size from the smallest of 30 gallons per minute over at Riley Creek Park, Riley Lake Park, to our largest one, which is, let's see, where's that one at? Spring Road, number 20. That has a pumping capacity of 940 gallons a minute. The main thing I'd like you to take a look at here is the far right column. That is our reserve remaining capacity of these lift stations. When you take a look at the current flows that we're experiencing and you evaluate that against the clock, because sometimes sewer systems have a more active time of day than others. You know, when we're all off to work, our houses aren't generating much sewage. So we have to take that into account, and we have to plan for diurnal changes in the system. If you'll note over on the far right, a lot of these reserve capacities are significantly more than you might think. You know, at least 50%, some of them are double the actual usage capacity. So we've got, in almost every case, plenty of lift station capacity in our system already. The red lines on the MCS interceptor sewer map here show how there's no arrows on this map, but generally speaking, sewage is flowing from the north and the west through Eden Prairie, ultimately exiting to the south. Goes across the Minnesota River to the Blue Lake wastewater treatment plant. There's a common metering station down at the bottom. You see 2 green dots. Meter 409 is important to us because that's the sum meter that accumulates all of the flows from basically the entire West Metro area, and we get the bill for that. Actually, what they do is they subtract the flows coming into Eden Prairie, and then from that, they subtract it from the total flows, and we get our total. It's kind of a complex system, but it actually works fairly well. We don't have any large sewer users in Eden Prairie, which makes our pretreatment system very easy to manage. If we had 25,000 gallons per day or more of industrial use, then that would be of great significance to the Metropolitan Council, but we don't have any commercial users that generate that kind of flow. The 10-year average annual per capita wastewater flow for our city is 79 gallons per day. And that's based on the total metered sewage flow and divided by our total population in Eden Prairie. And I know that changes over the years, but the average is 79 gallons per day. If we use the winter quarter water meter data to estimate our water use for the residents, we subsequently get an average sewer usage from that value. Looking at our water meter use in the wintertime, which closely approximates the sewer flow. You know, when you think about it, about 95% of the water that we meter into our homes goes down the drain. We actually consume very little of that water. So what goes through your water meter in the winter is a pretty close approximation of what your sewer bill ought to be, and that's how we do it. That's how everybody does it in the business. Taking that value, we get 74% of the total water that's going down the sewer comes from our residential consumption. So Eden Prairie is a very big residential water user for the sewer system. If we take 74% of 79, that gives us 60. So 60 gallons per day is what our residential use is of the sanitary sewer system. This correlates almost exactly with our dry season period of time. If we take a look at our metered dry season sewage flow, which would be in the summertime during the periods of time where we don't have any rain, we come out very close to 60. So having said that, we believe that our winter quarter estimates are very close. So for future planning information, again, we use the same projections that the rest of the comprehensive plan does. Our wastewater projections are based on some facts that are specific to Eden Prairie. Of note, region-wide throughout the entire 7-county metro area, the overall average is 85 gallons per capita per day of sewage use. MCES has applied a future goal of 60 gallons per capita per day for residential and 15 gallons per capita per day for employee accounts. So if we were, and I shouldn't say accounts, but if you take an employee who comes to Eden Prairie to work but goes back home in the evening, it's estimated that he might possibly use about 15 gallons during his day while he's working here. So that factor is applied to the number of employment positions we have in our community. The 60 gallons per day Met Council believes is a good reflection of what conservation can get us in the future. And also they believe that that aggressive goal is something that we could possibly achieve metro-wide if we really get a handle on the I&I situation that's going on in the sanitary sewers. In our own planning efforts, we understand, however, that as systems age, it's always likely that a pipe network is going to leak. So you have to plan for that happening, even though you do your best to keep it from getting there. Traditional design flows are at 100 gallons per capita per day, and anytime a new development is created or new urban areas are built, 100 gallons per capita is the planning factor used to size that sanitary sewer. So we should always be oversized following that plan. Looking at the land use, our sewer flow projections were modeled. Acreage for each land use is something that we can pull from a map. Looking at the TAZ, we can understand and know what the anticipated types of land use are. There are actual factors for sewage consumption based on those types of land use, and we can arrive at a pretty good value that helps us understand what the total flows might be. Our peak flow factors are in the chapter as well. Peak flows include things like inflow and infiltration, and also other aspects that create peak flow times. And in our community, it's basically when people come home from work, that's our peak flow time. That's probably the biggest one of all. Our wastewater flow forecast is based on a 10-year annual average for the city of Eden Prairie. Ours, it is 80 gallons per capita per day. Even though metro-wide it's 85, we're less than that. We believe that 90 gallons per capita a day would probably be a good place to be for planning. And this is for flow forecasting, not for construction or actual development of resources. We'll build for 100, plan for 90, achieve something less than 80, hopefully 60 like the Met Council would like system-wide it to be. Of course, there's a trunk system analysis. I won't necessarily need to get into a lot of detail there, but all of the sewer pipes in town flow into branches and trees, and they all come together. And the bigger the pipes, the more flow they take. And there's ways to model that and figure out if it's big enough or not. And in every aspect, it's over capacity, so we're in great shape. I mentioned individual sewage treatment systems. We've got just about 200 in town. We don't allow new sewage treatment systems for individual homes to be constructed unless there's no technically feasible alternative for that home. If the property is situated so much higher than a sanitary sewer, so much lower than a sanitary sewer system within a quarter of a mile, it's better off that they don't spend the money to try and hook up. Also, if there are specific neighborhoods where the topography just isn't appropriate, we'll continue to allow our residents to use their own sanitary sewer system on site. However, when their property gets filled up and they don't have any more place to put a new septic system after they've already depleted all the spaces that are available, then something will have to happen there. But our general policy is, unless it's technically infeasible, we don't allow any more to be built. Our capital improvement program for the wastewater system is just like with the water system. It's self-sufficient. Both our operating budget and our capital improvement plan call for the growth of cash reserves. We're hoping that through the course of how we've designed this plan, that all future needs will be met, and any bonding that's necessary for large projects will have the available cash flow to satisfy the repayment of those bonds. Generally speaking, we're looking at, on the water side, $2 million of growth per year in our reserve fund and $1 million in our sanitary sewer fund. So those are the primary components of both the water and the wastewater plans. Let me have your questions.
Questions? Commissioner Valera.
So water is one of my favorite topics, so I only have 100 questions here. No, I'm joking. No, I have one mainly. Regarding water efficiency and the rebates, have you reached out to Excel or the Department of Commerce to try to expand the available energy efficiency rebates through the Conservation Improvement Program to include water efficiency programs, since every gallon conserved has a direct relationship to kilowatt hour conserved, as an attempt to, give additional funding to people to buy water efficiency appliances and other improvements?
I'm very interested to hear more about that. It sounds like a great idea. Our approach has been primarily just for the water itself, and in the savings that you both get from your water rate structure usage being less and therefore lower on your pocketbook. We've seen on our planning side of the house the need for growth to be far less than we had planned for in the distant past. When I first came here in 2006, we were anticipating that Eden Prairie would need to expand the water treatment plant by 2030. The 28 million gallon per day capacity that we had didn't look like it was going to be enough based on all the water use that we were seeing over the summertime for irrigation purposes. The last 5 years, we've had almost, continually negative water growth in terms of our water use. So we don't have to expand the plant. We got more than enough capacity. So that's a savings financially. But in terms of the energy rebate, I guess I really hadn't thought of that.
So you have 22 lift stations, and if there's less water that you have to move, that's less electricity that needs to be consumed at those lift stations or the pumps to move water around the city. So that becomes a savings to your department and the city itself.
Yes.
I'll ask one more question with your indulgence. I know there's probably not an immediate need to do it, but thinking about how, the sewer system and the water system sort of follows peaks. We know people use it in the morning, people use it in the evening, and at halftime of the Super Bowl. Have you looked at changing the way the rates are structured to include a time component to consumption? So as opposed to just, you have your fixed charge, and then you have your volumetric, which is used on how much you use over time. Have you thought about, and this probably has to be in conjunction with new metering, looked into how that would look like to the customer if you started to put water consumption on a time of use basis as opposed to just a volumetric?
I have not.
Over time.
And a good part of that is because I don't have a metering system that would be able to tell me when somebody's using it. I know that they have used it several days after they have. And we're working on a technology option that would allow us to help those individuals that really want to know how their habits on any given day influence their water consumption, their water use, and their bottom line. But we really haven't thought about, diurnal changes over the clock and trying to structure our rates accordingly. It's been suggested that if we could only pump the water treatment plant only at night when electric utility rates are less, then we could save money that way. But we just simply can't possibly have enough storage capacity to do that.
Thank you.
I just had a question. You had mentioned a large user is using 25,000 gallons per day.
Yes.
Is that correct? And we don't have any in Eden Prairie?
No, we don't have.
Could you just give me a visual of what
what that would look like? Someone that, a super user, I guess, or a large user?
Sure.
Be like a 15-story apartment building, or?
Wow. Well, you know those chlorinated water supply trucks that run around town? Each one of those are 5,000 gallons. So if you took 5 of those, that would be how much it would take for one day. Or what would be another good example? I'll tell you what, I'll get back to you on that one. I
Okay.
can't think of a specific, but this room here wouldn't be that much. So
Okay.
it'd be larger than this room.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering what kind of user would have that much discharge?
Oh, well, industrial manufacturing that requires a lot of water for their
Cooling or something?
cooling and
Okay.
their press operations and so forth.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Farr? did you have something? Thank you. Yeah, and a lot of this is follow-up to other comments, but yeah, I would think industrial and hotels, restaurants, things like that. So that actually popped out as one of the very first things. This metric that we've been using for water, this GPDC, gallons per capita per day, seems strictly like a residential metric. And each community would have a different blend of non-residential mixed in with their residences.
They do.
Some have large industrial parks, some have a lot more hotels, some have a lot more restaurants. And so I'm curious as to why the Met Council uses a metric that could vary so much from municipality to municipality, and so that it means something real for us.
Well, the way that we actually do that is we do turn the residential component into the residential per capita per day. But the overall gallons per capita a day is just a nationwide way of looking at it, because they commonly will just take your entire pumped water use over the entire year and divide it by the number of days in the calendar year by the number of people who live in that town. And they arrive at a number. And that number isn't exactly a number that means
Sure.
anything truly accurate or significant, but it's a number. And I'm with you.
Yeah,
How can my number in Eden Prairie be anything close to what Bloomington has?
right.
They've got way more hotels, way more industry. It'll be altogether different.
Okay. And seeing the numbers come down over the last number of years, I'm sure is in part due to the Minnesota Plumbing Code changes, where they have required from us architects and engineers lower water flow fixtures. And maybe in communities that have more development going on, growing communities, that's made more of an impact than a more mature community like ours, where new fixtures are probably a small percentage of construction.
Sure.
But they have to account for some level of decrease in water consumption, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so are we going to be doing any education or promoting on gray water separate piping systems to reduce new water consumption as well? Does that have any legs, traction at all in?
Well, Eden Prairie's approach to that is, as people come forward with a desire to do so, we'll do our very best to work with them within the plumbing code to make sure that there's a way to accomplish that. A lot of towns don't want anything to do with it because the potential for cross-contamination is such a concern that they would just rather say no. And the plumbing code is kind of gray on that right now. However, both Department of Health and DNR are working with the plumbing board to try to arrive at a better place for that, knowing full well that it's where we're going to be and where we need to be within the next 10 years.
Right. It's always confused me because our Minnesota Plumbing Code has been driven by the plumbing union for many years, and a separate gray water system would provide more plumbing jobs because there's more piping, and usually they're behind that.
You'd think so, yeah.
They fought waterless urinals for how many years? So, I mean, that's a really strong lobby right there for our codes, I know, but that's another issue.
To be perfectly candid, I think folks in my line of work are fighting it probably more so than the plumbers, because they're afraid a water supplier is responsible for the sanitation of the water all the way to the tap. And
Yep.
if there's a possibility of contamination, it scares us.
Right, right.
I think it's a great idea, so I'm not one of those people, but
Okay.
I know
all right.
there's a way.
All right. And then my last question has to do with back with the Met Council with the MCES collection of the sack and wax sewer assessment charge and the water assessment charge. Is that only for the MCES interceptor system, or do some of those monies come back to the city to help you with our piping?
We also, as a community, have sack and whack fees that we charge that are a part of that whole process. So we recover those costs for new development as well. But, Robert, do you know, I don't believe we get any share of the MCESs. I've never seen that.
They keep it all, okay. And Sack and Whack is only recovered for commercial industrial, right? Not for residential? Or is it for single family or multifamily and not single?
It's for everybody.
It's for everybody's. Singles.
Council has their own Sack and Whack fees.
Yep,
We collect a form and send them a check.
right,
And then the city has our own, and it is for all uses.
all uses.
Residential to commercial.
Okay, good, good. Thank you. That's all I had.
Any other questions? Thank you for all that work. It's something that you don't see or think about until it's a problem, right? So, thank you. All right, moving on tonight, do we have any members' reports? Continuing business, new business, entertain a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Freiberg, a second by Commissioner Kirk. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.
I was waiting for you to oppose that.